Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video covers one of the most intense and shocking battlefield situations in recent months. A massive flood trapping thousands of Russian soldiers near a river as Ukrainian forces unleashed a wave of surprise strikes that turned the entire area into a disaster zone. What began as a strategic retreat for Russian troops quickly turned into a desperate fight for survival as rising waters, collapsing bridges, and precision artillery fire combined into a chaotic storm of destruction. This is the full story of how a sudden flood changed the course of the front line and left Russian units stranded, vulnerable, and exposed to relentless Ukrainian attacks. It all started when heavy rains pounded the region for several days, causing rivers across the occupied zones to overflow. Military engineers had already warned that the ground was unstable and supply lines were under strain, but no one anticipated how quickly the situation would deteriorate. When the water levels began to rise, Russian forces positioned near the riverbanks were ordered to hold their ground, thinking the flood would pass. Instead, the river swelled beyond control, cutting off entire battalions from their supply convoys and communication hubs. Ukrainian reconnaissance units noticed the change almost immediately. Drones captured footage of Russian trucks submerged in muddy water, soldiers wading through flooded trenches, and makeshift rafts trying to carry ammunition across the current. To Kiev's military planners, this was a golden opportunity. The moment was ripe for a coordinated strike, not just to inflict damage, but to demoralize Russian troops already trapped by nature's fury. Within hours, Ukrainian artillery batteries began targeting key crossing points. Precision-guided shells struck pontoon bridges that Russian engineers had been building in a desperate attempt to reconnect the cut-off forces. Explosions echoed across the valley as flames rose from destroyed vehicles. The once calm river turned into a battlefield, its waters filled with debris, fuel, and broken armor. Drone footage showed soldiers trying to cling to floating planks, while Ukrainian artillery fire rained down relentlessly. As the floodwaters deepened, communication between Russian command posts broke down, field radios failed, and reports of missing units began to pour in. Officers in nearby positions were unsure whether to send rescue teams or retreat themselves. Some units tried to improvise, using civilian boats or makeshift bridges, but these efforts collapsed under constant bombardment. The panic grew as entire platoons were reported lost or scattered. The terrain that once offered protection now became a trap with no escape route. Ukrainian special forces, guided by real-time drone intelligence, launched swift raids on the few dry positions left on higher ground. They targeted artillery stations and supply depots that Russian troops had abandoned. Captured Russian communications revealed confusion and frustration, commanders demanding air support that never came, soldiers pleading for evacuation, and broken transmissions describing the flood as an impossible nightmare. The psychological impact was devastating. Many Russian soldiers, already exhausted by months of fighting, were now soaked, freezing, and starving. Nighttime temperatures dropped dangerously low. With supplies destroyed and ammunition running out, the trapped units could do little but try to survive. Ukrainian loudspeakers blared surrender messages, urging the stranded troops to give up before it was too late. Some did, others tried to swim across the river only to be swept away by the current. The flood was not entirely natural, though. Intelligence sources suggested that Ukrainian engineers had deliberately targeted a dam upstream, triggering a controlled release of water that worsened the flood. If true, it was one of the most daring and calculated moves in the entire conflict. The operation required perfect timing, synchronizing the flood with artillery strikes to maximize chaos. Satellite images later confirmed that the dam's gates had been destroyed around the same time the strikes began, hinting that this was no coincidence. By the third day, the situation for Russian forces was catastrophic. Entire units vanished. A large portion of their armored vehicles were either submerged or abandoned. Helicopters attempted rescue operations, but faced heavy anti-air fire. Ukrainian forces used precision missiles to target landing zones, forcing aircraft to retreat. What was left of the Russian front line in that sector collapsed, opening a new gap that Ukrainian troops quickly exploited. As word of the disaster spread, panic rippled through Russian command structures. Telegram channels loyal to Moscow began posting conflicting reports. Some claimed that the flood was caused by Ukrainian sabotage. Others blamed it on poor planning and the army's failure to secure defensive engineering. Families of soldiers trapped in the flood demanded answers, while pro-war bloggers accused the Ministry of Defense of covering up the scale of the loss. Meanwhile, Ukrainian morale soared. Videos shared online showed soldiers celebrating their success as drone footage captured the aftermath. Rows of wrecked vehicles, destroyed pontoon bridges, and vast areas of land now transformed into swamps. Military analysts described the event as a perfect storm, a combination of natural disaster and tactical brilliance that exposed the vulnerabilities of Russian logistics. The operation proved how weather, terrain, and timing could change the course of battle more effectively than brute force alone. International reactions followed quickly. Western defense experts praised Ukraine's adaptability, while Russian officials downplayed the event, calling it a temporary setback. But satellite images told a different story. Dozens of kilometers of flooded terrain, broken supply routes, and stranded units signaling distress. The images became viral across media outlets, symbolizing the growing chaos within Russian ranks. In Moscow, officials faced growing pressure to explain how thousands of soldiers ended up trapped without warning. Rumors emerged that field commanders had ignored early flood alerts to avoid looking weak before their superiors. Some soldiers who managed to escape described the scene as apocalyptic. Tanks half buried in mud, corpses floating down river, and constant shelling echoing in the distance. Survivors reported walking for miles through flooded farmland just to find a safe road. The Ukrainian side, though celebrating, remained cautious. Military spokesmen emphasized that the operation was still ongoing and that mop-up actions continued around the flooded zones. They confirmed that hundreds of Russian soldiers had been captured, many of whom were in severe condition due to exposure and exhaustion. The success reinforced Ukraine's strategy of targeting not just enemy troops, but their ability to maneuver and resupply. As the waters began to recede, the full scale of the destruction became visible. Satellite photos showed a landscape scarred beyond recognition, vehicles buried in silt, makeshift bridges twisted like ribbons, and ammunition crates floating miles downstream. Environmental experts warned that the area would take years to recover. The riverbanks were littered with wreckage, oil spills, and burned equipment. For Russian forces, it was one of the worst logistical disasters of the war so far. Back in Kiev, the government framed the event as both a victory and a warning. Officials said that Ukraine's adaptability and intelligence coordination had proven decisive. The flood, they argued, symbolized not just nature's power, but Ukraine's ability to turn even the harshest circumstances into opportunities for resistance. The country's leadership praised its soldiers for their courage and quick thinking under pressure. Russian media tried to shift the narrative. State television claimed that the flood was a result of reckless environmental sabotage, by Ukraine and that it endangered civilians, but independent analysts pointed out that most of the affected zones were active military regions with little civilian presence. Attempts to frame the event as a humanitarian disaster failed to gain much traction internationally, especially after video evidence confirmed that the targeted zones were being used as supply routes for military convoys. In the following weeks, the Kremlin quietly replaced several commanders responsible for the sector. Intelligence leaks suggested that some officers faced disciplinary action for gross negligence. Reports also indicated that Moscow began deploying engineering brigades to build more secure bridges and reinforce flood-prone regions. However, the loss of manpower and equipment had already dealt a significant blow to Russia's operational capacity in that area. The flood also sparked discussions within military circles about the increasing role of environmental warfare. Analysts debated whether manipulating terrain and water could become a new front in modern conflict. The Ukrainian operation, whether intentional or opportunistic, showed how geography could be weaponized to create devastating results without massive troop deployments. It was a reminder that wars are not just fought with bullets and missiles, but with timing, intelligence, and adaptation. For the soldiers who survived, the memories of that flood would never fade. Many described it as a nightmare where nature itself became an enemy. Drowned vehicles and scattered uniforms became haunting symbols of a campaign gone horribly wrong. For Ukraine, it was another demonstration of resilience and tactical innovation, turning a natural event into a strategic advantage. The world continues to watch as both sides adapt to new challenges on the battlefield. What happened near that river stands as one of the clearest examples of how unpredictable this war has become. A simple shift in weather, a broken dam, and a few well-laced strikes changed the entire dynamic of a front line that had remained static for months. In the end, the flood run became more than just a battle report. It became a symbol of chaos, adaptation, and the fragile balance between man and nature in modern warfare. Thousands of Russian soldiers learned that even the most fortified positions can crumble when the earth itself turns against them. And Ukraine showed once again that agility and intelligence can outmatch size and strength. As new reports continue to surface, analysts believe this event could reshape how both sides plan future operations. The use of natural barriers, flood zones, and terrain manipulation might become central to Ukraine's defensive tactics. Russia, on the other hand, will likely pour resources into better infrastructure to prevent another catastrophe. But the scars of this disaster, both physical and psychological, will linger for a long time. The story of this flood is a stark reminder that in war, control is an illusion. Commanders plan, soldiers fight, but sometimes nature writes the ending. What unfolded near that river will be studied for years to come as an example of how a single moment, a surge of water, and a burst of artillery can change everything. Thank you all for watching. If you found this analysis insightful, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more in-depth updates from the front lines. The situation is constantly evolving, and we'll keep bringing you the latest developments as they happen. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video.